Why did you take the key in the first place?
I wanted to see you, probably talk to you, and I knew you wouldn't let me in otherwise.
Yeah, but that's not good because it's putting us in danger. You could have flipped at any point. It's out of order.
Yeah, I know. I just don't want to get in trouble.
Well, just as long you just don't do it again. And if you come near the house again,
I won't come near the house again. I won't contact you again. Okay?
I think that's best.
Imagine being trapped in a nightmare with no escape from the person stalking and harassing you. This was the reality for 19-year-old Shana Grice. After months of stalking and harassment, Shana felt like she had nowhere to turn. Her boyfriend, Michael Lane, had refused to leave Shana alone following the end of their secret on-and-off relationship and had resorted to tracking her every move. Terrified, the young girl turned to the police for help, only to be fined £90 for wasting their time. In a case that shocked Britain and sparked reform in domestic abuse case handling, today we're diving into the case of Shana Grice. Before we begin, we would like to send our sincere condolences to the loved ones of Shana Grice, who fell victim to the horrific events described in this case. Born in Portslade, Sussex, Shana was the only child of Sharon and Richard Grice. Attending school at Hove Park, Shana was studying for her GCSEs when she met and began a relationship with one of her classmates, Ashley Cook. After their exams were over in the summer of 2015, the pair would talk excitedly about the next steps in their relationship, and they had even begun to save for an eventual wedding. It was at this time that Shana began looking for a job, and before long she found herself getting ready for her first day of work as a receptionist at Brighton Fire Alarms. Here she quickly learned the ropes and was excelling in her new role. Loved by her colleagues and customers alike, there was one man in particular that caught her attention: 26-year-old fire alarm mechanic Michael Lane. Michael Lane had grown up in the same area and was well known among locals for, all the wrong reasons. The 26-year-old had a history of concerning behavior towards women. Michael was accused by multiple women and young girls of being controlling in relationships, as well as sending explicit messages and photos. He was known to stalk some of the women he was involved with, loiter outside of their homes, and subject them to harassment. Michael was even accused of assaulting one woman during their relationship. In 2010, he had been arrested on suspicion of grooming a 14-year-old who attended a scout group that he volunteered at. Though the charges were later dropped, police said they would put a marker on his record in case of any subsequent reports being made. There were accounts of Michael being very controlling in another relationship, bombarding a woman with explicit text messages and pictures of himself, pestering them to sleep with him for money, even loitering outside of their homes. In one instance, Michael was accused of harassing two women he met at a pub and sexually assaulting another. One of the girls, Ellie Mae, would later speak out, claiming he stalked her over a period of 10 years, during which he sent pictures of her bedroom window and text saying that he was watching her before she saw him parked outside of her house. Of course, Shana, who was much younger than Michael, hadn't known any of this when she met him, and she felt an immediate attraction to the rugged, handsome 26-year-old. Over time, as things progressed, it wasn't long before the pair entered into a clandestine relationship, even while she was still in a relationship with Ashley Cook. Initially, the pair got on well. Michael showered Shana with gifts and affection, taking every spare minute he had to spend with his new lover. But soon enough, Michael's pattern of hostile, controlling behavior began to manifest, and Shana would cool things off with Michael in December of 2015. Not wanting to let Shana go, Michael sent her flowers on her 19th birthday. Unmoved, Shana reported the gift to her boss and called it inappropriate. Days later, Shana returned to her car only to find that her tires had been slashed. While working out what she was going to do, Michael turned up out of the blue and offered to change them for her. Shana knew it was he who had destroyed the tires, and after the incident, Shana made every effort to block him out of her life entirely. Angered at being reprimanded, Michael decided to take things to the next level and out their secret relationship. leaving a note on Ashley Cook's car reading, "Dear Ash, Shana has and always will cheat on you. Happy New Year," along with dents in the car and long scratches that had been made with keys. Ashley was furious with Michael and wanted to protect Shana, but the harassment would only escalate from there. Shana, who was now living in a bungalow in Christory Road, Mile Oak, with 2 roommates who would begin to notice Michael standing outside of her home, waiting for her in the mornings. Trapped, Shana would wake up with a sinking feeling, knowing that if he wasn't outside her house, he would be waiting for her at work. As instances began to add up, including one where he struck her with car keys, Shana turned to Sussex police for help, reporting Michael on February 8, 2016 for stalking and harassment. Shana told the call handler, "I really don't know how to start this conversation, but I think I'm being stalked." Officers took her report, but Shana omitted some details, telling the police that Michael was simply a colleague who had misconstrued the parameters of their relationship and had grown obsessed with her. After taking her account, police officer approached the pair's workplace and spoke to the HR manager there. Here, the officer told the HR manager that he was worried about Shana's safety, but took no further action against Michael, citing a lack of evidence, and simply warned him to stay away from the 19-year-old. Not taking the police advice, the stalking only continued, and on the evening of March the 24th, Shana attended an office party for a short while, leaving early. Her 2 roommates had also attended the same party and, to Shana's horror, had returned home with Michael. Angry and upset when she saw him turn up, Shana left the house and began walking in the direction of Ashley's home. Michael followed her up the street, and he ran at her, pulling her hair and taking her phone in a vicious attack. A passerby pulled over and consoled Shana on the street before taking her to Ashley's home, where she relived the incident to her boyfriend and his parents. The police were called, and the next day, Sussex police officer Trevor Godfrey arrived at the home to take a statement. Breaking protocol, Ashley was allowed to stay in the room with Shana as she recounted the events of the night before. Because of this, Shana omitted the details of her and Michael's relationship from her statement and asked the police to keep Michael away from her. However, when Michael was interviewed, he produced texts between the pair that led the officers to believe that they were in a relationship. Thinking this was nothing more than a lover's tiff, Officer Godfrey decided to take action. Only he took action against the wrong person. Shana was fined £90 for wasting police time in a phone conversation that took no longer than about 84 seconds. Officer Godfrey would later comment on the text messages Michael produced, saying she would be signing her text with 5 kisses. This is not harassment. This was a smokescreen to disguise her affair. There was nothing there to make me think that she was in any type of danger whatsoever. Devastated and losing hope in the police helping her, Shana would turn to friends and family. A system was set up where someone would message her every few hours to make sure she was alive. Soon after the incident, Shana quit her job as the receptionist at Brighton Fire Alarms, desperate to put more distance between herself and Michael. But, as is the case in so many situations of domestic violence, leaving is often neither easy nor a safe option. With victims going back to their abusers multiple times before leaving for good, Shana was no different. Michael would bombard her with texts and calls, leaving hundreds of messages threatening to kill himself if he couldn't have her. Eventually she gave in, and by early 2016 in June, Shana had broken things off with Ashley, and the pair was once again in a relationship, even going to a Rihanna concert at the Wembley Stadium together. But with Michael's behavior out of control, this relationship ended in early July of 2016, and Shana decided to give things another go with Ashley. Angered, Michael stole a key to her home as she left, setting a new plan in motion. By this time, he had lost his job after the alarm company had found that Michael's work vehicle, which was fitted with a tracker, had regularly been seen at Shana's home during office hours. Michael was suspended pending investigation but would later resign, giving him more time to obsess over the 19-year-old victim. On July the 8th at 6 a.m., Michael used a key to break into the bungalow and crept into Shana's bedroom. Shana, having heard the footsteps, hid under the duvet under the guise of being asleep, and she held her breath as she heard someone standing over her. Minutes that felt like hours crept by, and eventually Shana heard the sound of him leaving. Looking out the window, she saw Michael walking away from the house. Thinking that police wouldn't believe her if she reported this, Shana set about gathering evidence of her own by calling Michael to confront him about the events of that morning. The call between Michael and Shana continued until Shana told Michael that she was very angry at him and that he couldn't just steal property and to expect her to be all right with this. At this, Michael seemed to break down, admitting to Shana that something wasn't right in his head. He didn't know what it was, but he said he felt like he needed to figure it out or else be locked up. The call concluded with Michael imploring Shana not to tell anyone about the incident, saying that he didn't want everyone in town to know about what he had done. But regardless, after the call, Shana contacted the police immediately, and Michael was arrested under suspicion of theft of a key and was issued a police enforcement notice for harassment. Despite this, Shana was still deemed low risk by authorities, and so no further help was offered to her. Michael continued to up the ante, and just 2 days later, on July the 10th, Shana called the Sussex police once again to report a series of calls she had received, which she believed were made by Michael. On one of these calls, she had answered and heard heavy breathing down the line. Terrified, she took note of the number, only to be told by a call handler that it couldn't possibly be Michael because Google showed the number was actually that of a local travel insurance company. In actuality, the number was Michael's landline, and despite police discovering this days later, still no action was taken against him. 2 days later, Shana was driving her car when she noticed Michael was in a car behind her, tailgating her wherever she went. She reported the incident to the police, and later that day, Shana made a final call to the police asking for an update and believed the overwhelming evidence she had collected would be enough to finally get the police to take action against Michael for her protection. But although the calls were referred to the case officer, she received no response. Referrals were made to a victim support program and to RISE, an independent domestic abuse charity based in Brighton. But sadly, because the calls made from these organizations to Shana were from withheld numbers, she didn't pick up, scared it was Michael on the other end of the line. Over the next few weeks, Michael continued his campaign of terror. Letters would arrive at Shana's home from Michael trying to coerce money from Shana, believing that she was in debt to him. Michael would continue to turn up at home, and despite pleas from her friends to go to the police, Shana knew the man in charge of the investigation was already against her and would berate her for blowing things out of proportion. On August the 23rd, 2016, Shana met with Michael at a hotel in Hove. Here, they discussed their relationship and what Shana had been through, and Shana told Michael that enough was enough. He needed to leave her alone. Michael would later speak to a friend and tell her Shana would pay for what she had done. Not ready to let the innocent 19-year-old go, Michael began plotting what he would do next. The very next day, Michael woke up early and donned a disguise before leaving the house. Wearing a high-visibility jacket and cap to hide his face, Michael arrived at Shana's home shortly after 7:30 a.m. Having stalked the terrified teenager for months on end, he knew her routine. He also knew that both of her housemates would have left by this time and that she would be alone. Michael broke into the bungalow and swiped a knife from the kitchen before turning into Shana's room. A neighbor heard a female voice shouting and screaming out in pain before everything went quiet. Shana had been murdered in her bedroom, and Michael had broken into her home while she was alone and vulnerable, and he had proceeded to mercilessly slit her throat. Once he was certain that Shana was dead, Michael stole her bank cards and left the house wearing a hoodie that he had stolen, with the hood pulled over the cap to avoid being recognized. Then he headed to the nearest cash point, arriving at a cash point on Graham Avenue less than a half a mile away at 8:06 a.m. Here, Michael checked her balance before withdrawing £60 from the victim's account and going into the shops. He bought a bottle of water. At some point, Michael poured gasoline into the water bottle and drove back to the scene. Going inside once again, Michael moved Shana's body face down onto the bed and splattered the gasoline around as an accelerant before setting it on fire and fleeing. Once he got home, Michael immediately set about destroying all evidence, including the knife and the blood-stained clothes, before showering. By this time, Shana should have been at work, and her absence did not go unnoticed. Her manager called Ashley to see where she was, Ashley, who had left the home hours before to go to work early, called his sister Amy and asked if she would go over and make sure everything was okay. When Amy arrived, she was met with a bloody footprint on the doorstep and immediately called police and her father. Amy's father, Ian, arrived at the scene just minutes later and immediately smelled smoke coming from the letterbox. Ian screamed Shana's name and pushed on the door, surprised to find it unlocked. As he walked into the smoke-filled bungalow, he made his way to the bedroom door and struggled as his lungs filled with smoke. He went back outside to catch his breath before running in and bursting through Shana's bedroom door. Through the haze, he saw Shana lying face down and covered in blood. As the neighbors flooded onto the street to see what the commotion was, emergency services arrived and took over a desperate attempt to revive Shana, but it was of no use. She was dead. Later that day, the police finally put the pieces together. They went over the numerous attempts that Shana had made to contact them, as well as discovering a tracking device attached to her car, not to mention, of course, the bloody footprint found at the scene. Michael was arrested at his workplace. As police arrived shortly after 1:50 p.m., he was putting a spare tire in the back of an Audi and acted like he couldn't believe what he was hearing, repeating "murder" as he was placed in the back of the van. When Michael was interviewed, he claimed to have no knowledge.
So at about 9:45 yesterday morning, Shana Grice was found dead in her bedroom. Tell me what happened to her. Well, when her body was found, it was clear that someone had assaulted her and they'd tried to set fire to her body. So tell me what you know about what happened to her yesterday.
I only know what I've been told since being in here.
Michael told detectives how, on the morning of Shana's murder, he had woken up, showered, and then gone for a walk from his Thornhill Rise home to a local McCall's to buy a bottle of water. When he returned, he took another shower, owning it to the fact that it was the hottest day of the year and he was sweaty. After showering and putting on his work clothes, he drove to the McCall's shop on Graham Avenue, where he checked a lottery ticket from the night before. After this, Michael told detectives that he sat around waiting for a dentist appointment, stopping off at his grandmother's house and speaking to his father, and then also to a friend who worked overseas. Frustratingly, there was insufficient evidence to charge Michael with any offense, and he was released on bail pending further inquiries. Brighton and Hove's officers made extensive inquiries in Mile Oak and the areas surrounding the homes of Michael and Shana. Officers spoke to hundreds of people, some of whom gave key information for the investigation. 5 days after the murder, a woman driving near the New Barn farm saw a man on a single-track road leading to the farm. She recognized him as someone who had been pictured in the news as a suspect. She contacted police and searches began of the area. Officers found a pair of white Lonsdale trainers on the left-hand side of the hedgerow on the path leading to the New Barn farm. Blood found on the trainers matched that of Shana, and DNA showed that Michael had worn the trainers. The tread of the trainers also matched a bloody footprint found on the doorstep at the crime scene. Michael was rearrested and interviewed a further 4 times, changing his story slightly with every version. Officers reviewed hundreds of hours of CCTV footage and were able to put Michael at the ATM where cash withdrawal of $60 was made from Shana's bank account. On a wider search of the area, Michael was also captured on CCTV the previous day at the West Hove Sainsbury petrol station, filling up a red gasoline can. Faced with this mounting evidence, Michael continued to change his story yet again, this time telling officers that he had been at Shana's house on the morning of her gruesome murder.
In the morning, I did go to Shana's. After I'd been to Valley Road shops,
Yeah.
and I was seen going back, parked up. When I went past her road, her car was still there,
Okay.
which I knew was odd because she was meant to be. I knew she had started work at 8:30, and that was about the time. It was about 20 past 8, so I knew she would have had to have left for work. So I went round, walked round there. The door was open. The front door was open.
Wide open or unlocked?
No, it was open. No, it wasn't wide open, but it was like half open. So I went in there. Her bedroom door was half open again, and she was on the floor.
Michael claimed that Shana was already dead when he walked into the room and found her body, but he claimed that he had decided against calling police or telling anyone about the incident because he was worried that police might think it was him who killed Shana. But in spite of this story and the attempt at an explanation, police now thought they had sufficient evidence to charge Michael with murder, arson, and theft. During his 2-week trial, which took place at the Lewes Crown Court in March of 2017, Michael and his defense team continued to argue that he had simply found Shana that way and had only gone over that morning to make sure that she wouldn't contact him anymore. Throughout the court hearings, he proclaimed his innocence and said that he only fled the scene because he was scared that police would suspect him. But the jury saw through his lies and the facade that Michael was attempting to put on and would ultimately find him guilty of the first-degree murder of Shana Grice. In his sentencing remarks the next day, the presiding judge, Justice Green, addressed Michael directly and said, "In my judgment, this was a murder following significant premeditation. When you set out on the 25th of August, you intended to kill Shana in her own home. You knew where you would find the appropriate killing weapon in Shana's kitchen, and it was part of your plan to use that knife. This was a long way from a spur-of-the-moment killing. You also combined murder with arson. If you had not closed the door behind you when you left Shana's bedroom, then the fire would have been fed by the oxygen from outside the room, and there is a real likelihood that the house would have burned down and Shana would have been incinerated. There is also the risk that the fire would have spread to neighboring homes, causing danger to the lives of others. I also cannot ignore the theft. This was a cold-hearted and callous action. It revealed the lack of remorse on your part that has, just minutes before, murdered a young woman you profess to adore, and you set about stealing her savings. I do not believe, however, that the theft was the main motivation for the murder. That was a combination of anger at Shana for having split with you and jealousy of any other man, such as her long-standing boyfriend Ashley, that she might replace you with. Michael Lane was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years before being considered for parole. Following the sentencing, Mr. Justice Green went on to heavily criticize the way officers handled Shana's complaints, stating that they had made wrongful assumptions and treated Shana as the perpetrator of a crime instead of a victim, and instead treated Michael Lane as the victim. The judge further noted that those investigating failed to understand that a young woman in a sexual relationship could be both vulnerable and at risk of harm. In the aftermath of the murder trial, the police watchdog conducted a 2-year investigation into Sussex police handling of the case, resulting in 13 police staff being investigated for misconduct and 1 for gross misconduct. A disciplinary panel later found former police constable Trevor Godfrey guilty of misconduct for failing to investigate Shana's complaints of harassment. Shana's parents have expressed their belief that the police lack of training, care, and a negative attitude towards Shana contributed to her tragic death. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment down below with your take on it, and subscribe to the channel. On your way out, don't forget to hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new, shocking case. Until next time, stay safe and keep your eyes peeled. You never know what's lurking in the shadows.